right, you guys, thank you so much for joining. We are very happy to have everyone today on our call. I would like to just introduce myself. My name is Wendy Carrick, and I am here to fill in for Anissa today. Anissa has had an emergency surgery with her husband and is not able to join. So, like Sheila mentioned, thank you for bearing with us as we kind of move through this webinar. But again, we're really excited about this topic, Intangibles Matter, Mining Advantages in the Connected Age. So this is part one of, I believe, three. This session will be talking about leveraged EQ and immediate HR solution. We've heard so many things about that over the last little bit. I'm very excited to hear from Joe Stefano, who is an expert in this topic. And so welcome, Joe. We're happy to have you.
Wendy, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. The webinar is meant for you. If you've joined us today and have specific questions in mind, certainly do let us know. Using the chat, we'll be happy to answer any questions that we can. If we can't answer them during this call, everyone, we will certainly get back to you with those answers. But please feel free to use the chat with any questions. So we also want to say thank you to the Whitmarsh Consulting Group for sponsoring our webinar and all of our webinars. The Whitmarsh Consulting Group is a group of distinctly skilled experts who specialize in creating revenue streams through digital marketing. If your organization would like to benefit from expanding your digital footprint, check them out online at wcg-bp.com or give the founder, David, a call at the number you see there on your screen. Again, my name is Wendy Carrick, filling in for Anissa Avon. I am the Director of Coaching and Training here at TurnKey Coaching Solutions. We're sad to miss Anissa because she is so great, and I'm happy to put her picture up there because she's awesome. And again, just please let us know if you have any questions. Our experts at TurnKey have decades of senior level business experience in addition to years of HR development practice and extensive training and really some serious credentials. At the end of our webinar today, we'll be inviting you to a Fast Pass strategy session, which is a complimentary 60-minute strategy session to use as a means of sampling our consulting service and expertise, certainly without obligation. As a certified performance coach, business consultant, trainer, and adjunct instructor, Joe has 25 years of entrepreneurial experience that he can draw from, leading inspiring professionals, executive leaders, and business owners to experience a breakthrough in their own leadership skills. Like I said before, Joe is an expert in emotional intelligence, executive thinking, and career management. Joe focuses his well-honed communication talents to develop the intangibles in leaders to facilitate sustained personal growth and success. When all else is held equal, the intangibles matter, and Joe's affinity for people and desire to empower people can help you gain and develop emotional intelligence. Once introduced, I almost always say, expert name, how did you become an expert in the topic of this webinar, Joe? If you could give us a little bit of background on, how did you come to this? I know this is your passion.
Well, Wendy, first of all, thank you for the introduction. I hope I live up to everything that you said. And I'd like to thank the Whitmarsh Group as well. When I kind of blanch at the idea of an expert because I feel like it's still in progress. But when I think about what puts me in that category, it really comes down to a couple things. One is awareness, and you'll hear, as we get into the session, you'll hear us talk about self-awareness relative to emotional intelligence. So I would say my own individual awareness, but then on top of that, EQ is just such an integral part of coaching. So whether it's explicit or implied, almost every coaching session either touches on or discusses emotional intelligence. So that continues with every coaching session. That continues to raise my awareness. After that, I'd say opportunity. I've got an opportunity, if you will, to pay attention, not only to my own emotional intelligence, but then emotional intelligence of the people that I'm working with, and frankly, those that I encounter now. And last but not least, I would say I'm a student. I continue my education around emotional intelligence and coaching in general. The one thing that I realize now about emotional intelligence, and frankly, I feel as if I've learned a lot. All it's really identified is how much more there is to learn. And the reason that I associate with that is we're talking about people and emotions, and we are infinitely interesting beings. So if I am an expert, I would attribute it to both awareness, opportunity, and the fact that I continue my education.
Great, Joe. And I think that's critical for all of us, especially in the HR function as things change. And as we learn more about emotional intelligence, it's certainly important. So happy to hear that. And like I said, I know this is your passion, and we really appreciate you taking your time today to share it with us. So with that, I will turn the time over to you, and certainly insert any questions that I have, and for the audience, please feel free to enter your questions, etc., into the chat. Go ahead, Joe.
Thank you, Wendy. And again, it's my pleasure to be speaking with you today. And Wendy mentioned a couple times about a passion. So this topic is associated with my passion around coaching, but then also literally a lifelong curiosity, and that is what I call the dynamics of groups or teams. Early on, when I was just a kid competing in sports, I was intrigued by the idea that the most talented teams, the best teams, didn't always win. I saw evidence of that in my consulting experience when I led teams, both small and large, for global organizations. It didn't matter if we had the A team. There was always another dynamic, and that was the human aspect. So it's a pleasure for me today because I get to talk about both a passion and a curiosity. As far as my background, I started out as a systems engineer. From there, I proceeded into consulting. I always leaned towards the people side, the business side. I eventually led groups for IBM, Hitachi, and then eventually Apple, as well as my own company. As far as today, just some ground rules. I'm going to try and bring as much of my personal experience to bear here today. And I'll ask you, just being an active participant as well, I'll echo what Wendy said. If you have any questions, please ask. And wherever possible, bring your own personal experiences. So as we get into this, yes.
Sorry,
yeah.
Joe, I don't see that the slide is advancing.
Oh.
There we go. There you are.
I'm so sorry. There's two thoughts I want to start out with, and that is the first is, why does it take more than facts to make good decisions? And the other is, why are the best, most talented groups or teams unsuccessful at times? And let's just put those in the proverbial parking lot. We will come back to those later, but I think that they are significant thoughts here. As far as our goals for today, it's my intent to introduce you to emotional intelligence. Often it's abbreviated as EI or EO, and EQ, and the EQ is quotient, and we'll see that on a subsequent slide. The value advantages around emotional intelligence and a process where you can increase your own. I want to give you an understanding of the skills associated with emotional intelligence. And last but not least, identify some ways that you can leverage your own immediately. As an example, I'd like to cite a sports team, and it's the 1980s U.S. Olympic hockey team. And for those of you too young to remember, basically they were a team of amateurs that went up against the top Russian professional hockey team, and the USA won. And it was totally unexpected. And afterwards, you heard things like, do you believe in miracles? Or you heard a lot of comments around the word chemistry, which again is an intangible. And interestingly enough, if you look up the word chemistry related to groups or teams, they talk about it as it's a dynamic process that occurs when groups of individuals decide that they're going to stick together in pursuit of a common goal. And it goes on to say it's an important variable to the pursuit of success. So I posture that when that Olympic team won, and they were talking about chemistry, they were talking about folks believing in one another, what they were touching on was emotional intelligence. However, at that point in time, we really weren't aware of the concept. You heard Wendy talk about the connected age. And if you look at this depiction of the whole person, this is the belief of what the whole person consists of today in the 21st century. It's three components: intelligent quotient, emotional intelligence, and personality. IQ is defined as a person's ability to learn. And typically that ability matures at around 17 years of age. Personality is really the traits that we're born with that are then either refined, increased, depressed by our experiences. And the third component is our emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is really nothing more than the communication between our logical and intellectual brains. Another way of putting it is, it's our ability to be aware of our emotions in real time and to take some action either for or against those emotions. Prior to the 21st century, science believed that we were comprised of just two components, IQ and personality. And the long-held belief around that was that high IQ equaled success. The belief was that high IQ was the greatest indicator of performance. And so therefore, when organizations, when teams went looking for leaders or someone that was going to be in a paramount position, they immediately went to the person with the highest IQ. What we've gone on to realize is that that may not be exactly the case. The thing that I'd like you to take away from this slide is EQ is the only part of our person that we have the ability to grow and increase and change throughout our entire lives. Unlike IQ that hits a maturity rate or a maturity level, EQ never peaks. So I'd like to ask you to participate in this first poll. Consider the reference that someone knows how to push another person's buttons. And if you will, recall a time when you were unexpectedly reacted emotionally, but wished that you had reacted differently. And please give us some indication of what was the feeling or behavior that you experienced afterwards.
Great, I'm just giving everybody a chance to answer that poll, and we will tally that up in just one moment.
Thank you, Wendy.
You bet. So it looks like frustration is the #1 result at 50%. Coming in second is our anger. Gets us a little bit angry when we when our buttons get pushed. I'm going to share those results now.
Not unusual. Not unusual. When we look at this idea of someone pressing buttons, what we're really talking about is something that we call trigger events. And the best way I can describe a trigger event is some action that someone might take that will often elicit sometimes an uncontrollable but predictable response from an individual. I'd like you to consider this. Events take place around us throughout our lives all day long as we go about our business. We have absolutely no control of the events that occur around us. We do, however, have control over our responses, and that's where emotional intelligence comes in. And I'd like you to think about it in the sense of a formula. And the formula is the event plus my response equals the outcome. And if you have any question around the validity of the formula, apply it to some experiences that you've had and look at the different ways that you might have responded and the different outcomes that could have occurred. The takeaway from this poll is we all experience some emotional hijacking at some point in time. It may be due to the fact that someone presses a button or we experience a trigger event, but we do have the ability, if we're aware of what's going on, to control and therefore affect the outcome. If we move on here, this is a depiction of the human brain. So the question is, why can't I control my emotions? Why can't I control myself? And I'd like to give you a little bit of an explanation of what's intended here. Through 21st century technology and science, it's possible now to do brain mapping. And by brain mapping, I mean we have an opportunity to verify the activity that's occurring within a particular section of our brain, and therefore determine exactly what's going on within us. If you look in the upper right-hand corner, that yellowish portion of the brain, and by the way, this is a profile of the human brain. So that yellow portion would be behind our forehead, and it's our frontal lobe. And that's the section where all of our rational thought occurs. If you reverse the position of those arrows and go down into that greenish section, that's called the limbic system. And the limbic system controls all of our emotions and feelings. The reddish portion there is the brainstem and our spinal cord. Whenever there's any kind of stimulation, a signal is sent through our body, up through our spinal cord, on its way to our frontal lobe. Again, where all of our intellectual thought occurs. However, there's only one route to the frontal lobe, and that is the impulse passes through our limbic system. And by the way, our limbic system sits over our right ear. So in a fraction of a second, there's an impulse that goes from our limbic system up through our frontal lobe. There's only one route. However, we are, and I like to say, hardwired due to that path to react emotionally before any rational thought occurs. And that likelihood only becomes accelerated, accented, if it's something that involves a lot of stress, trauma, or if there's a fear impulse in there. You know, you often hear about a person who's attacked by a shark, who initially starts flailing and then somewhere gains control of himself and takes some action that allows him to break away from the shark. It's that first emotional impulse that is the very nature of emotional intelligence. Here's an example that I'd like to give you. So I'm a big sports fan, and I'm from the Philadelphia area. The Philadelphia Eagles, some years ago, signed a coach who was the latest and greatest savior from college football. And they paid him about $10 million a year, and they signed him to about a 5 or 6 year contract. About 4 years into it, he was fired. And in the press conference that took place afterwards, when the owner of the team was asked why he would suddenly reverse course and rid himself not only of the coach, but give him $10 million plus to go away, his response was twofold. One, I want someone who's going to restore the culture of my organization back. And what was implied there, that he had changed the organization and not for the better. And the second point he made was, I need someone with high emotional intelligence. And he went on to explain how this new head coach had alienated literally everyone in the organization, from the grounds crew through his players. And he explained how the coach, if in fact he encountered one of his players outside of the facility, would not even acknowledge them. That's a perfect example of poor or low emotional intelligence. And we'll get into that a little bit more. The takeaway I want to make here is, we are hardwired to experience an emotional reaction before any rational thought occurs. And that's supported by research and brain mapping. So the takeaway is, unless we can intercede somehow, there's a good possibility we will react emotionally first. So what is emotional intelligence? And it consists of literally 4 skills. And the skills fall into 2 categories: those that pertain to us as individuals, our person, and those that pertain to us as we interact with society. On the person side, there are 2 skills: our self-awareness and our self-management. Basically, what that means is, am I aware of the emotions that are occurring in real time? And do I have the facility to manage those emotions? On the social side, it's social awareness. And basically what that means is my ability to understand the emotions that are occurring within the people that I'm interacting with. And how might I use that knowledge to manage the relationship? The takeaway here is, of these 4, if you're ever at a loss for where to start with yourself, with your emotional intelligence, start with self-awareness. Because without a good awareness of what's going on in ourselves, we're almost doomed to failure in terms of any of the other competencies. So again, the takeaway is the criticality of our own self-awareness around our emotions. So how did this become a thing? Remember the earlier slide that I said there are 3 components to self. And the third one really became something that we were aware of in the 21st century. However, prior to that, there was this common belief that, again, the highest IQ was the greatest factor for success. However, again, with modern science and technology, we now have the opportunity to crunch incredible amounts of data. And through that data crunching, we can pick up patterns. And here were 2 patterns that popped out at the research. Why is it that the people with the highest IQs outperform people like myself with an average IQ only 20% of the time? Doesn't seem like a great factor for success if it's only 20% of the time. So they went back and looked at the numbers from a different perspective, and they realized that people with average IQs were outperforming those with the highest IQ 70% of the time. And it led to the belief that there's got to be something we're missing. And it was through that realization that there's got to be another factor here that they stumbled on emotional intelligence. So the takeaway that I'd like to make here is, there is absolutely no connection. Again, I'll repeat it. There's no connection between our ability to learn, our IQ, and our success in life or in business. So why does it matter? Here's some of the additional information that the research delivered. They discovered that emotional reaction occurs before rational thought. Think back to that depiction of the human brain. We're hardwired to experience the emotion before we ever get to any sort of rational thought that would occur in our frontal lobe. They came to the conclusion that good decisions required more than just factual information. And a little bit later on, I'll try and answer why I think that is. The other thing that they realized was that whether it's noticed or not, any emotional reaction we have or that we experience is recorded somewhere in our psyche. They also discovered that 66% of us, now think about that, 66% is 2/3. 2 out of every 3 people are typically controlled by their emotions. And 90% of high performers, ironically, also had high levels of EQ. Notice there's no mention there of 90% of high performers relative to high IQ. I'd like to introduce you to a concept here, and the concept is called plasticity. And it's defined as the brain's ability to make new connections based on new experiences. And with the idea that the more we repeat an action or an experience, the more likely it is to turn into a habit. And when we're executing on habits, and again, this goes back to the technology that allows science to monitor the portions of our brain that are engaged. When we're operating on a habit, there's no activity going on in our brain. So why do we mention this? One of the keys to any sort of behavioral change isn't necessarily the change itself, but the real difficulty comes in making a commitment to repeat the action, i.e. a ritual, that will turn it into, we like to say, muscle memory, which is nothing more than a habit that allows our brain to basically execute on autopilot. So if we could ever get to the point where we know that there's a trigger point that we're susceptible to, and we can come up with some ritual that allows us to practice that, the more that becomes a habit, the less conscious thought it takes for us to overcome that challenge. So the takeaway here is emotions occur before any rational thought ever takes place. And unless we've got a level of awareness and a solution to that awareness around our emotions, chances are we are liable to repeat a bad reaction over and over again. Are there any questions at this point from anyone? Wendy, I'll take that as a no. So what were the research conclusions? Top of the list was EQ more than any other factor determines successful or unsuccessful outcomes. Additionally, they discovered that not only does EQ stand on its own, but it's now recognized that it's a fundamental building block, if you will, for a lot of other different types of leadership qualities. For example, decision-making, time management, communication, presentation skills, accountability, assertiveness, and the two that I really gravitate towards, tolerance and empathy. When you look at the totality of the significance of EQ on its own, and then adds things like these other foundational skills, EQ becomes a rather compelling quality, and one that we all would like to attain. The takeaway here is more than any other factor, EQ will determine either positive or negatively the outcome of the situation. So what's the impact? Again, EQ is the strongest driver of leadership and personal excellence. It is the single largest predictor of performance. There's a direct correlation between high IQ and high EQ and improving one's EQ with earnings. And in terms of the whole person, the high EQ relates to better job satisfaction, better relationships, overall happy people. An example I'd like to give here, and it's interesting because someone just sent this to me last night, and it was an article titled "Amazon Almost Killed Best Buy, ... until they did something brilliant." And the article went on to explain that Best Buy in 2012 was hemorrhaging money. They had the lowest employee engagement that they ever had. Their retail stores were failing miserably. And in essence, they became a showroom for Amazon. And that the practice was that people would typically do their shopping on Amazon and then only show up at Best Buy when they wanted to touch, feel, sample, leave, and then just go back to Amazon. So in essence, Best Buy was becoming a showroom for Amazon. At some point, the CEO resigned and they brought in a new CEO. And almost immediately, he came up with the decision that they were going to make a significant change in their approach, not only to their own employees, but just people in general. And that is, they wanted to take a people-centric approach. So his first two orders of business were to incorporate emotional intelligence, first with leadership and then using it throughout the organization. And he partnered it with a new strategy. And the new strategy was a focus on people. The same focus that the corporation was giving to the employees, they wanted the employees to extend to the customers. Along the way, they decided that they were going to change their pricing policy, and they became what's called a price matcher, meaning that whatever lowest price you can find, they'll match. Suddenly, they no longer became a showroom for Amazon, but they had an advantage over Amazon, and that is that people were coming into their stores. So they had people, if you will, connected. With the new policy in terms of matching prices, they were able to close the deals there. When you looked at the primary goals, the first was a focus on people, employees first, and then customers. They were looking for a way to turn a weakness into a strength. That was the price matching. And then they instructed their people, don't sell. We want you to establish relationships. The selling will follow. We want people to come back, not to Best Buy, but they come back to the salesman that they trust, the salesman that they have a relationship with. These days, Best Buy is enjoying the most successful time of their existence. And it's interesting, and what I find interesting about this is, whenever I look at anything that's related to behavior, the solutions typically, and I think I may have mentioned this earlier, are not that difficult to incorporate. And so I think it gives us a false sense of, the phrase I think of is, I've got it. So that once we get some initial success changing a behavior, we tend to slack off a bit. Where the real heavy lifting comes in, where the real battle is in making the commitment to repeat the process, if you will. And that goes back to the idea of a habit or a ritual. The takeaway from this slide, EQ is the strongest driver of leadership and personal excellence. Here's our next poll. I'd like you to recall a time when, either in work or outside of work, you were suddenly confronted by someone in an agitated or angry way. And we'd like to understand, so how did you react? What, did you use aggression? Did you feel anxious? Were you able to stay calm? Did you respond diplomatically? Did you make a mental note to get back at them later, or some other feeling?
Looks like we've got a couple more still doing it, so it's interesting. I probably would have chosen used aggression, but no one else did, and I'm really just kidding. You want to use aggression sometimes. So I'll end the polling now so everybody can see where we landed. So it looks like most of us were diplomatic and assertive, which is great. I'd be curious to know about the other, which is 29%, and then we had a tie for third, which is felt anxious and stayed calm. Nobody used aggression, so that's a good sign.
Well, it's a very good sign that the vast majority selected diplomatically and assertive. Basically, that's a sign of good emotional intelligence. Keep in mind that most of us at some point will experience some emotional hijacking. Our awareness and our ability to control that reaction are the keys to something like a diplomatic yet an assertive response, or even staying calm. EQ is the factor that controls the length of time of emotional hijacking. And that's where the self-awareness comes in. So the takeaway from this slide is, again, the event plus my response determines the outcome. So what does emotional intelligence look like? Again, we've got 4 skills: self-awareness, my ability to understand, perceive my emotions in the moment that they're happening with an understanding of the tendencies that I typically have. My self-management, how I manage my emotional reactions to situations and people. On the social side, my social awareness, my ability to pick up emotions in those people around me. And last but not least, relationship management, how I use that awareness of their emotions in my interactions with others. EQ, remember, EQ is nothing more than the communication between our physical and logical brains. Just visualize that depiction of the human brain. And the takeaway from this slide is, without a doubt, the most critical, the most important skill for us to develop is our own self-awareness. So how can I go about improving my self-awareness? We tend to come up with the direction that you want to go in. Where do you think, what strategy can you employ that will give you the greatest impact? When dealing with emotional intelligence, it's not a time to do multitasking. The idea here is concentrate on one skill. Again, the whole concept around making behavioral changes is one that we quickly believe we've got a handle on. And with that thought, we look to pull in a second skill. The idea here is make your progress with the first one and then move on. The idea then of practice these lessons so that they become rituals. And the key again is practice. The goal here is progress, not necessarily perfection. In coaching, we like to say that the environment always wins. And in this particular case, especially where it relates to emotions, that idea of the environment winning out, or the settings that in and around us will have some sort of overpowering result towards us. This is real. So unless we can do something to again be aware of what our emotional reactions and tendencies are, and then have some action in place to counteract that, we're more likely than not to have an outcome that we don't necessarily favor. An example of this roadmap is with a healthcare professional that I'm working with. And this is a COO of, like I said, a healthcare organization. I was brought in to work with her on her leadership skills. And through our coaching sessions and using a technique of role playing, what I realized was, and what she came to be aware of, was this idea that when she was dealing with two particular people on her staff, she became very passive. And this was a revelation to her. We were able to confirm it with some of the evidence-based testing that we do around strengths and then EQ. And then from there, used role playing to raise her awareness of how she behaved when she was dealing with these two individuals. I'm very, very pleased to say that the result has been that not only has she changed her attitude towards these individuals, but what she's reporting relative to not only these two individuals, but her other two direct reports is improved overall team performance. They're more engaged as a team, and now they're considering how might they incorporate a coaching approach into their everyday management. So how might you start on your journey to EQ? We basically recommend that, again, you start with self-awareness. And there are really three different ways that you can go about that. The first is to understand, based on your values and beliefs, what were their roles in some of your experiences relative to both successful, but more importantly, difficult situations. A second way of looking at it is increase your awareness around your emotions. Understand what causes them. And third, where you have an area that you recognize that is either uncomfortable or you're failing at, instead of avoiding it, lean into it. Try and come up with strategies that will allow you to work on that individual discomfort, if you will. The takeaway here is self-awareness is the perfect starting point. And without self-awareness, you'd almost be at a loss to have any success later on. So here's another poll. What do you think is the common reason why a person leaves an organization? Is it due to some dissatisfaction with the organization itself, the employer? Or is it typically due to some interaction with an individual, whether a co-worker, a manager, an executive?
Yeah.
And we've launched the polling, just waiting for folks to add to. Give it another few seconds. All right, it looks like we're all in agreement that it is a person. So everyone that voted and said that absolutely it was a person, a manager, director, someone else.
Amazing, amazing. Let me give you an example of a current coaching client of mine. I'm working with a woman who was the top salesperson nationally in her organization for a couple of years. Without any input or discussion with her, she was promoted to a national sales manager. And it created some hardship for her, both in terms of location, travel, as well as salary. But she was really gung-ho because she believed in the organization. So she contracted with me outside of any involvement with her company, although her company was aware of it. So for, I'd say, 5 months, we were working on this idea of her making that transition into a management position from an individual contributor. And this was probably about 5-6 weeks ago. We had a session And what I encountered was someone who was extremely agitated. We spent the first 5 or 10 minutes with her just venting. What became very clear was that there was a shift in her desire for our coaching. We were no longer going to target her becoming the best manager, but rather her target was to have a new position outside of the organization by the end of this year. And she went on to explain to me that along with this promotion that she received, they now installed someone between her and the person who originally hired her. And apparently that person has a much different style than the organization itself. And she went to HR, did not get any reasonable explanation, and so she decided to leave. So now my question would be, how does this organization measure that loss in both hard and soft dollars with a remedy that could have easily avoided the whole situation? And I suspect, given the background of this audience, that you folks probably have a better appreciation for what those soft dollar costs might be to an organization. So how might you leverage your emotional intelligence immediately? Again, remember, we're trying to raise awareness here. So if you remember the 4 skills, there's a slide early on that shows the 4 skills. That's an excellent reminder. Display it someplace where you see it often and prominently. If you're aware of someone who presses your buttons or situations that typically trigger some sort of emotional reaction from you, select 1 or 2 of those. We like to talk about creating an emotions versus reasons list. And basically what that is just looking at, so what was the outcome? What emotion was I feeling at that time? What was the reason for that emotion? And how did it affect the outcome? And one that I think is especially useful, the idea of monitoring yourself several times a day, much the way someone with high blood pressure would. And I'm not talking about sitting down and taking 40 minutes to do a self-analysis, but rather at a point in time, just get in touch with what am I feeling, and what are these feelings due to? And the belief is that you'll begin to see patterns. The takeaway here is behavior-related solutions seem basic. The heavy lifting, as I said, the challenge comes in with the commitment. And with the commitment comes the practice and ritual. And if we can make that commitment, sooner or later, muscle memory will take over. So we're coming to the end. Final thoughts. More than any other factor, EQ determines outcome. It can be increased throughout our lifetime. In business, it represents a competitive edge. In life, it can make us happier, more fulfilled, more balanced people. And it does have a direct impact on our mental and physical well-being. The most important thing here is, more than any other factor, EQ determines outcomes. I'd like to give you some information from some of the research. The World Economic Forum recently ranked the top 10 skills of value in terms of the connected age of 21st century. They listed EQ as number 6. Career Builder recently did a survey and came to the conclusion that 71% of hiring managers value high EQ over IQ. 59% would not hire a candidate who had low EQ but high IQ. And the vast majority of the people polled indicated that they use EQ to assess leadership candidates. Additionally, Dr. Newman did some research around EQ and realized that it also, along with the effects that it has on individuals, those individuals experience lower absenteeism, lower turnover. They had higher employee engagement. There was fresh thinking and creativity, and that the organization and the people within it were likely to quicker adapt to change in the marketplace. So you remember early on I mentioned the word chemistry relative to the USA Olympic team. I'm convinced that chemistry is a synonym for EQ. It's that, you hear things like bunker mentality and things like that. It's that connection that we make through emotions with people, where the importance of succeeding for the other person takes over way beyond any appreciation or desire for our own success. Why does it take more? We had those two questions in the beginning about why does it take more than factual information to make a good decision? Or why don't the best or most talented groups or teams always succeed? My theory is I offer it's because of EQ. Without taking EQ into account, all the facts in the world don't allow for any people involvement, any effect from emotion. Likewise, with teams, and why don't the most talented teams win? It's because that statement doesn't take into consideration the human element, which can greatly influence, if not determine, the outcome. Remember, in today's connected age, people want more than just a paycheck. They want involvement, they want to be engaged, they want to make a contribution, and they want to be active participants in their results. And emotional intelligence gives them that ability. The statistics don't lie. That's bringing us to the end of our session today. I'd like to remind you to look for your invitations for the second parts of this webinar series. Part 2 is on coach approach, a management style, and part 3 will be on designing and sustaining high performance environments. The couple final takeaways here. Researchers have stated, and I'm reading this now, if we are what we repeatedly do, then excellence can go from a single act to a habit. And remember, with habits, we're on autopilot. Once we establish it, it takes on a life of its own. And last but not least, organizations can leverage a competitive edge with a focus on their people.
Great. Thanks so much, Joe. Appreciate that.
I'll just make one more quick point here. I just want to, you'll see all the research I did, but I would like to acknowledge Sheila Cunningham and Eileen Domingo, Wendy, for all the help and support they gave me, as well as Diane Allen, one of my coaches and the leader of Strategic Leadership Academy. Folks, I thank you very much. I hope you got something out of this.
Great, Joe. I really appreciate it. Before we go, we've got about 6 minutes. I just want to remind you that we are more than happy to conduct a fast-pass strategy session between Joe and Anissa, or Joe and myself. So just let us know how we can help you. We're always open to any comments, questions, concerns that you have as well. So feel free to email us anytime. And I just want to leave a couple of minutes. I didn't get any questions in the chat, but certainly want to open it up if anybody has any questions. All right, you guys, we will be sending out a recorded version of this, so feel free to review it again. And again, just know we are here to help in any way we can. Would love to put you in contact with Joe if you're interested in doing an emotional intelligence session for your team. And until next time, you guys enjoy your day.